From 1924 all the way up to 1950, kids were vanishing off the streets of Memphis under some very strange and suspicious circumstances. And when I say kids, I don't mean just a handful of them. We're talking about thousands, over 5,000 children stolen right out of the streets of Memphis, Tennessee. Some of them were even taken straight out of their mom's arms in the hospital right after they were born. Now, who in the world would do something like that, and why? The answer is Georgia Tann. And the reason she gave for what she did, well, they'll leave you absolutely floored. Good evening, y'all, and welcome to another episode of Bloodshed and Breadcrumbs. This is episode 7, and as always, I'm your host, Andrea. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. I do also want to introduce, I've got a couple of guest hosts in here with me tonight. I am house sitting, babysitting, pet sitting at my daughter's. And with me tonight is a very lovely bird named Freddie. He's I believe, green cheek conure. I know the conure part is correct, but I believe he's a green cheek. You may hear him. His favorite phrase is, "What you doing?" And then there's 2 kittens in here also with me, and they're pretty rambunctious, and one of them is very vocal. But anyway, tonight's story is about a woman who made sure the Memphis orphanage that she controlled was never short on children for those that were looking to adopt. And here's the kicker. Even many celebrities actually went to her agency to adopt kids. In fact, at least one of the children who came from her operation grew up to be pretty famous themselves. Stick with me because I'm going to walk you through the whole wild story. Now, here's the thing. Back in the early 1900s, records weren't exactly neat and tidy the way we'd expect today. And honestly, even now, records can get lost. You know, sometimes because there's computer issues, sometimes because someone wants them to conveniently go missing. And with Georgia Tann, it was both. Paper trails that should have been there, gone. And trust me, that was not an accident. So let's back it up for a second. Who exactly was Georgia Tann? She was born July the 18th, 1861 in Philadelphia, Mississippi to Georgia and Beulah Yates Tann. My word, y'all. Maybe Freddie could talk better for me. But let me pause right here to clear something up because I know a few of you are already typing comments. And I've said it before, but when I give somebody's background, like their childhood, their family, their education, I'm not making excuses for their crimes. I'm not here to justify what any of these people did. I'm just telling their story. And to do that, you kind of have to paint the whole picture. Otherwise, it'd be like, here's their name, here's what they did, here's where they ended up. The end. And that would be boring. That's not how storytelling works. In fact, in the past, someone on social media decided to pop into the comments and accuse me of making excuses for criminals because I shared a killer's background. Y'all, I cannot even. I've said it 100 times. This podcast is about telling the victim stories too. I've never excused a criminal in my life, but some people just want to be nasty on the internet. So I ended up blocking her because she wouldn't shut up about it. And I turned the comments off for that video. I don't like to argue with people in the comments. It drains me. And at the end of the day, I'm just here for the victims, period. Anyway, back to Georgia. Her mom, Beulah, she was a school teacher, which was unusual for the time because back then women usually stopped working after getting married or, at least by the time they had kids. But Beulah kept at it. George's dad, his name was George. He was a judge. He was strict, authoritarian, and, the whole 9 yards. And George had big dreams for his daughter. He wanted her to be a concert pianist. So when Georgia was just 5 years old, she started taking piano lessons. And she kept at it all the way into adulthood. Maybe she liked it. Maybe she just didn't want to disappoint her dad. It's hard to say. One thing that probably did influence her future was that her father often brought home abandoned or neglected kids. So she grew up around children who had been cast aside, which might have planted some kind of seed in her. Georgia graduated from high school. Then she went to Martha Washington College in Virginia, where she got a degree in music. Later, she attended Columbia University in New York and took summer courses in social work. But here's the twist. She hated the piano. Hated it. She only stuck with it because of her dad. What she really wanted to do was to be a lawyer. And since her father was one, he taught her enough law for her to pass the Mississippi bar exam. Pretty impressive for that time, wasn't it? But George didn't want her to actually practice law because, heaven forbid, a woman lawyer exists in those days. And Georgia obeyed him. She didn't marry. She didn't want kids of her own. So she threw herself into work instead. She worked briefly as a social worker in Texas. Then she came back to Mississippi and landed at the Mississippi Children's Home Society. And she worked as the receiving director at the Kate McWillie Powers Receiving Home for Children until 1924, when she got fired for questionable child placing methods, which is such a vague way of saying something shady was going on. Couldn't find much detail about that, though, but I think that her getting fired tells us all we need to know. Now, not long after that, she moved to Tennessee and got a job as executive secretary at the Shelby County branch of the Tennessee Children's Home Society. And that was the biggest adoption agency in the state. And eventually she took over that agency, and in 1924, she officially began trafficking children. Now, adoption wasn't unusual in the 1920s, but here's the problem. There weren't really any regulations around it. Couples who couldn't have kids would adopt, sure, but Georgia's methods, they tarnished the entire system for decades to come. Once she had control of the Tennessee Children's Home Society, Georgia made sure she had a constant supply of kids. It started with children from poor families who couldn't afford to raise them, and from there, things spiraled deep, dark, and fast. At first, the society looked legitimate. Georgia had powerful connections backing her up. George Camille Kelly, a Shelby County family court judge, and a guy named Edward Hull, who was the mayor of Memphis at that time. With their help, she rose quickly and basically controlled adoptions in Tennessee, but by 1942, the Child Welfare League of America had caught on to her destroying paperwork. Key documents about where these children were going. So she lost her endorsement, she lost her license. But Georgia, she didn't care. She kept right on operating like it was just business as usual. Now fast forward to 1950, and the walls finally started closing in. Authorities launched an investigation, and what they found was horrifying. Georgia wasn't just facilitating adoptions, she was running a black market for children. And how was she getting these kids? Well, these kittens. But some of these kids were from poor families. Yes. But others came from inmates who'd given birth in Tennessee mental institutions. Single parents lost kids to her schemes. She'd even walk into nursery schools, pretend to be a welfare agent, and take children. No questions asked. And as if that's not enough, she bribed hospital staff into telling new mothers their babies had died, when in reality, Georgia was taking them, and sometimes she'd lure kids off the street with ice cream. The audacity is just mind-blowing. And just when you think it can't get worse, it does. If a child wasn't adopted quickly, they'd stay in Georgia's home. And that was a nightmare. Reports say she neglected them, drugged them, physically and mentally abused them, even sexually abused some of them. Rumors suggest she may have murdered others. During the 1930s, Memphis had one of the highest child mortality rates in the country. And honestly, I'd bet money she was responsible for a good chunk of it. Her allies, the ones I mentioned earlier, Judge Kelly and Mayor Hull, were deep in the corruption too. Kelly pushed adoptions through, signed off on custody and abandonment papers, even stripped divorcing mothers of their kids, just so Georgia could place them in, and you can't see it, but I'm doing air quotes, better homes. Meanwhile, Mayor Hull took bribes to keep complaints from families quiet. Dirty don't even begin to cover it. In total, about 5,000 kids were adopted out through Georgia Tann Society, and the majority of them went to wealthy families. We're talking about like Hollywood stars like Joan Crawford, Lana Turner, June Allison, and Dick Powell. Even the governor of New York adopted through her. And remember, I said that there was a celebrity, or one of the kids turned out to be a celebrity earlier. Well, that celebrity was the legendary wrestler Ric Flair. Yes, the nature boy himself was one of her kids. It's wild, right? I've been a wrestling fan all my life, and I never knew that he was adopted, let alone connected to such a, for lack of better words, controversial type of thing, other than the controversies, in and out of the ring. I didn't know that he was connected to this, and still I started putting together this episode. It just blew my mind when I read that. And when I told my son Alex, who used to do the podcast with me, my former podcast, it blew his mind. It was just something that we hadn't heard. But anyway, of course, Georgia wasn't doing this for the good of the children. She was doing it for the money. Rumors swirled that she placed kids in abusive homes with predatory men, or even as child laborers. She even ran newspaper ads, and one of them literally said, "Want a real live Christmas present?" I mean, that tells you everything about her mindset. The money was big. In Tennessee, adoption fees were only $7. But out of state, Georgia was charging households around $5,000. No wonder she was rolling around in a black stretch limousine with a chauffeur. She was living large on the backs of stolen children. Eventually, when a new governor came in, he launched an investigation. The focus was on financial fraud, since they figured that was easier to prove than the child trafficking. But Georgia never faced justice. In the middle of it all, she was diagnosed with advanced uterine cancer, and she died just days before charges were to be filed. After her death, the Tennessee Children's Home Society was shut down, but because Georgia had destroyed so many records, it wasn't until 1995 that birth certificates and adoption records were finally released. Some of those children went on to search for their birth parents. Others wrote books about their experiences. Ric Flair has even spoken about it on his podcast, To Be the Man. He believes his mother thought she'd been stillborn. He also mentioned that his biological brother reached out to him wanting to meet him, but Rick declined. Personally, I think I would have wanted to meet him, but hey, that was Rick's choice, and I'm sure he had his reasons. And that, my friends, is the story of Georgia Tann, a woman who built a fortune off the suffering of families and children. So, funny thing, I was putting this episode together and it hit me. I've never really introduced myself properly. If you've listened to my old podcast, Mystery, Murder, and Mayhem, you probably know a little bit about me already. But if you're new here, hey, just let me give you the quick rundown. So yeah, I used to host a different true crime podcast called Mystery, Murder, and Mayhem. But I wrapped that up back in 2024. And honestly, I think I did that because I was just burned out. I was really just going to take a little time off and then it ended up being just, I decided to end it. And then here I am back with a whole new one. I mean, it happens, I just couldn't stay away from podcasting for too long because honestly, I was missing doing this. Like, I don't make money off of it. It's just something fun that I do, and I love storytelling just way too much. Now, on a more personal note, back in 2023, I had weight loss surgery, and since then I've lost 165 pounds, and it blows my mind when I say that. And then just this past July, I had a panniculectomy, and that's the surgery where they remove the excess skin under your belly button, like that area there. And it was a very big step, but I feel like between the weight loss surgery and that plastic surgery, it gave me a whole new lease on life. Outside of podcasting, I'm a mom to 3 amazing kids, a nana to the sweetest grandson ever, and I've also got 4 fur babies running around my own house. So, yeah, it's never boring over here. And if you haven't picked up on it from my accent, I'm from South Carolina. For work, I keep it pretty down to earth. I'm a cashier at a local grocery store, but I also run a little side business where I make t-shirts, tumblers, all that fun crafty stuff. I even design images for like vinyl cut machines like Cricuts and silhouettes, all that stuff. I sell those online. But that's me in a nutshell. Mom, nana, pet, mom, podcaster, crafter, cashier, and storyteller. And now you know who's behind the mic when you hit play each week. All right, y'all. That's all I've got for tonight's episode. But be sure to check the links in the episode description because I've just recently added a TikTok for this this podcast. I want to again apologize for all the background noise this time. I'm trying my best to edit it out, but when you've got a vocal kitten and they've been rambunctious running around playing with all their toys, and then Freddie's over there singing his little song. Yeah. It's funny he didn't even say what you doing this whole time, because normally if I'm in here, he's like, "What you doing? What you doing?" He's dancing. But anyway, y'all have a good night. I'll be back here again next week for another brand new story.